One yaghfiru, which means to forgive, he forgives, and the other yuazibu, which means he causes torment or punishes or tortures or causes pain. All these are the different meanings of the word yuazibu. Mostly the commentators have pointed out various connotations of the word azab, but practically they mean all the same things, as I have already mentioned. To put someone to an extreme trial of pain and suffering is called tazib. Some commentators have gone to believe that the word azab in fact is derived from the word azb, which means sweet or palatable things. So in Arabic sometimes the same root is used to mean the opposite if inflected differently in a different sigha, as it's called in Arabic, in different bab. So they say tazib in fact is derived from the word azb, and azab or yuazibu means to deprive something of the sweetness of things, of goodness of life, so completely that no trace is left, and that itself is azab. Now, I believe that both these meanings are important. Sometimes the punishment takes the form of one's being deprived of goodness of things, and that becomes a torture indeed. The word goodness can maybe is understood differently by different people, but imagine a drug addict, for instance. For him, goodness is to get drugs when he so requires, and not to be able to reach the drugs when he is yearning to have them is a torture to him, but a torture of this type which is mentioned by some commentators, to be deprived of what one believes to be good, or what one is accustomed to use to his benefit and gets used to it and enjoys it thoroughly. So if you are deprived of all that, then the boredom which follows is torture and punishment. This applies to everything in life, not only to drugs. Even in the way you are used to live, when you no longer can. You see, when a girl leaves her parents' house after matrimony, for a few days, at least, months sometimes, for some it is prolonged into years, there is a very uneasy feeling of missing something. So that would be also a sort of tazib. But the other meaning of tazib is also true and applicable in context with God punishing people, to punish somebody by inflicting pain of some sort. So as far as the word azab is concerned, that is quite simple and well understandable. Now the second word which has been particularly discussed is ghufran, or to forgive. What it means. Let me see if this discussion has been included or not. I think it is left out. Is it? Where? सारे उलहा मक़सद there, where? That's right. वो निकालने कहाँ है? I remember it was here, but I couldn't find it. Yes, that's right. The infinite is Ghufran, Maghfiratan, Ghafara, Ghafran or Ghafran as well. Ghafara, Ghafran wa Maghfiratan. Ghafara lahu Zamba, Ghafran wa Maghfiratan. Which means that to cover one's crimes and sins. Basically, ghafara means to hide something under cover or under dust. For instance, if a worm gets embedded into the ground to avoid the light of day, this is the process of seeking ghufran, to cover oneself from sight, from unpleasant things, to hide under something, to be buried under something. All this is ghufran. So when we say God yaghfiru, that means God forgives. It means that the crime is there, of course, but God covers it. And this word is a very beautiful word in the sense to be used in connection with forgiveness, because it has more connotations than just the English word to forgive. To If a crime is committed by someone and he is forgiven, yet the whole world knows he has to live by that crime, he has to face the society, the life can still remain miserable even if he is forgiven by the law. So Ghufran is something which is so beautiful in comparison to the word forgiveness in English. It means that God covers his crimes so completely, as if they are buried and are out of sight completely. Nobody can even see it, and nobody can notice it. And he himself is relieved of that internal psychological torture of remembering that he is a sinful person. So all that is totally wiped out. This is the true meaning of the word Ghufran. Also, the word uh, is derived from al-ghifara according to some, or al-mighfar is mm, is armor, or let me say yalbisu tatal qalansa. This is dirun. This is what's it called? Helmet to protect one during the battle. Protect head, the head cover helmet. So this is also used to indicate helmet, al-mighfar, because the head is covered under this. So God protects such people. This is also the meaning. Not only forgives them, but protects them from what? Possibly from further crime. So Ghufran, the word Ghufran has that connotation as well. I believe that true Ghufran means that the person who has been forgiven will not repeat the crime. And according to the treatment of this word in the Holy Quran, I'm quite convinced that this meaning is also covered by the word Ghufran, because God forgives people on the plea, on the understanding that they will not repeat the crime. Tawbah precedes this, which means, oh God, we promise that we are not going to repeat it. So then they are forgiven and they are protected from repetition of crime. But if the tawbah is weak, so also maghfirah would be defective to that degree, and he will not be given protection. But if tawbah is sincere and honest, then God does provide that strength to fend oneself against evil influences. So this relationship should be well understood. Otherwise, you will find it rather unexplainable why some people apparently are forgiven, yet they repeat the crime. That shows that at the time of forgiveness, God knew that the tawbah was fragile, that the repentance was not sound enough. But He forgave, knowing that He is going to repeat, and if He comes to me again, then I'll provide him the cover of Ghufran again and again and again. But that is very dangerous state. It's not a safe thing to play with, because death can overtake anyone at any moment. That may be the moment of crime rather than the moment of Ghufran. So the real meaning of Ghufran would dawn only in the end, whether God had forgiven him permanently and totally and entirely, if he died in the state of having been forgiven. That means from then on till the death he could not repeat the crime. And that is the true forgiveness. So the word ghafara has all these various delicate connotations which are all applicable to the situation of sin vis-a-vis forgiveness of Allah. As against this, some some lexicographists have come out with a completely different view of the word, meaning of the word ghafar. They say, in fact, ghufran, the word ghafar al-marido, is the Arabic usage which indicates that the patient became ill again. So they say the word ghufran has also that connotation, which means that the relationship between the sinners and God as forgiver is something which continues to repeat. The patient goes on suffering again and again and having relapses of the same problems, same maladies, and God, like a good kind physician, coming to his help again and again, curing his wounds. So if that is the scenario, that also is true and applicable and very interesting. There are some other meanings of the word with the three letters Ghain, Fe, Re, which don't seem to be relevant, but maybe they have some relevance, like Al-Ghufro is what you call, गाय के बच्चे को क्या कहते हैं? Calf, yes, that's right. Yes, that's the word which was missing, escaping me. A new-born calf is also called al-ghufr. So what it has to do with the word, the meaning of ghufran, otherwise it's rather difficult for me to conceive, unless that it appears to be so innocent and so lovely to look at. So anything which is born without any sin or blemish, may have that connotation of ghufran, which means that once God forgives somebody, he has a new birth, like a newborn calf, and he appears to be so innocent, congenitally innocent. So maybe that is the connotation which is applicable and relevant to our relationship as sinners to God's forgiveness. Now I'll turn to this verse later on, 134, and we are still at 130. Now here, in the verse, وَلِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ يَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ وَاللَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. The main discussion among the commentators is regarding the nature of God as forgiver, in the sense that because he's the proprietor of everything, because he's the master of the whole universe, because he created everything, so he has right to forgive. That is understandable. But what is the nature of God's forgiveness in that capacity? This has been discussed and debated. Some people say, simply quoting Hazrat Ibn Abbas, which according to Imam Razi never said such a thing, only people misquote him, but some do misquote Hazrat Ibn Abbas and take the position that God, being the proprietor and possessor and the master of everything, exercises this right without any justification, and can exercise this right without any justification. Nobody can question. The Ashaira of the medieval ages very strongly took this view, in fact, and a long history of their fights and battles, which even turned into bloody battles with other schools of Muslim thoughts like Mu'tazila, raged on this very issue, whether God is to be treated as an arbiter and a sort of despot and a dictator whose actions must not be questioned even in search of wisdom behind them. So Ashaira, the main stream of the Muslims of that time, which still have the largest influence over Middle Eastern Muslims, and the Saudians, for instance, are completely under the sway of Ashaira. They consider it to be heretical for anyone even to attempt to investigate the wisdom of God's decisions. They say, يَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ. Like he can do whatever you please, Like, for instance, it is said about a judge that he, to show his authority and his power that he can decide anything, he used to pile up different cases and suddenly throw them apart with a dash of the two hands. Those which fell on the right side were decided favorably, those which fell on the left side were decided unfavorably. So nobody could question him. He was so powerful a judge. He said, now, these are the cases that decide in favor of the appellants and these against them, and so on and so forth. But God cannot be visualized like this. God has wisdom for everything. So the other school of thought, to which Imam Razi also belongs, maintains that this is an insult to God to visualize him taking decisions like forgiveness or punishment as he pleases, in the sense that he has every right to do whatever he may decide is all right. He moves with justice, he moves with wisdom, he moves with compassion, but even his compassion is justified. This is the position taken by Imam Razi, to which we fully subscribe, and this is exactly how it should be. So then what it means, man yashao, yu'azibu man yashao. Why God says, God describes it in such a manner as if uh, he's only uh, highlighting his power to do things. In fact, the word yasha is the key word which has to be fully understood. And Hazrat Masih Maud during his debates with Aryans, Aryas, Hindu generally, but Aryas in particularly, has laid stress on the true meaning of the word yasha. Yasha may be translated as whatever I decide. And generally, the people who want to imagine God as a supreme arbitrator or a supreme despot with full authority, whatever he may do, he decides. Understand this word in the meaning of decision taking of God. Whatever he decides, he does. Hazrat, this is why the Aryans, or not the Aryans, but the Arya Samaj of the Hindu religion, have bitterly and very viciously attacked such verses of the Holy Qur'an by creating an image of a despot God of Islam, which has nothing to do with the prudence and wisdom of things. Only he takes arbitrary decisions. Hazrat Masih Maud laid the stress on the true understanding of the word yasha, which means to wish according to one's own attitude to things. And Hazrat Masih Maud said that God being perfect, God being good, he cannot wish ill or cannot wish wrong. So the word wishing means that his decisions are justified and cannot be otherwise than that, because he would only wish what is good. If he could wish evil, then of course this situation would become very serious and objectionable and of course censurable as well. But the word yasha, according to Masih Maud is indicative of the will of a person who is perfect and who can neither think wrongly nor act wrongly. So justice is implied already in the word yasha. So the true meaning would be yaghfiru liman yasha, he forgives whomsoever he pleases, with, at least we should understand, with justice, with sound reason to do so, and punishes whomsoever he pleases with justice and sound reason. But that is not all. What follows further explains this word, this situation, because immediately after this the verse ends up by declaring Wallahu Ghafurur Rahim. God is extremely forgiving and compassionate and merciful. Now this in fact removes all the doubts about God being an unjust God in his decision. What is pointed out is this fact that although God can decide whatever he pleases, to forgive or to punish, but remember that he is all forgiving and all merciful. As such, the attributes of God which are going to dictate terms when he is going to take a decision about forgiveness or punishment would be his attribute of forgiveness and attribute of mercy which overwhelm all other attributes. So, in this context, the objection automatically falls and has no leg to stand upon. This means that, of course, God forgives as He may decide. But because He is very forgiving, it would take Him quite a strong reasoning not to forgive. So, unless there is a very strong reason against forgiveness, you can expect only forgiveness from God. And being so merciful, being so kind and forgiving, if He decides to punish, then you must be assured, must remain sure that there was a very strong reason for that punishment, otherwise God could not have decided to punish. So this is the true import of this entire verse in the light of many other verses of the Holy Quran. Now I will turn to the same old verse which generated such a debate and invited such bitter attacks from some of the Orientalists regarding Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's conduct during the world battle of Uhud and the conduct of the Muslims in general during the battle of Uhud and about the outcome of the battle of Uhud as they saw it. وَإِذْ غَدَوْتَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ تُبَوِّئُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ مَقَاعِدَ لِلْقِتَالِ وَاللَّهُ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. This discussion starts from this. This is the starting point of all this. Remember that time when you separated from your family members and showed the Muslim warriors their places which they should occupy during the battle formation, that is to say. Montgomery Watt has this to say about the Battle of Uhud. Eventually, Muhammad and the group around him managed to reach the slopes of Uhud, and here the Muslims were rallied and given some sort of order. A section, however, had become separated from the main body and had made for the stronghold of the clan of Haritha in the direction of the city. Of these, in number, perhaps nearly all were killed. Now, as I pointed out earlier, the total number of the Muslims martyred during the Battle of Uhud is about 70, out of which a large number belong to not those who were martyred during the battle and during the fight, but those who tried to return to Medina and against the teachings of Islam and against the specific orders of Ahmad. Now, what would be their fate? This is the important question which also is related to this episode. I personally believe that they did not defy the Quran, they did not defy the orders of Ahmad, but they were in a state of such immense confusion as to what had happened that they were not in full command of their senses to take right decisions. As we read the episode of the from various sources, it becomes very clear that the moment the rumor was spread that Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had got martyred during the battle, most of the companions loved him so much that they lost control of their faculties and they could not decide. Some madly rushed into the battle to get martyred themselves. Some said, everything, we don't know what to do, everything is over. They started returning home. So during that period, many of them must have been overtaken unexpectedly because they were not in a mood to fight at all. They thought everything is finished and gone with. So they were the most people, they made the largest number of those who got martyred in during the day of Uhud, which leaves us a very small number of Muslims killed while engaged with the enemies. So if according to Montgomery, almost all of them were killed, so that party, from other reports I can gather, was certainly more than 30, maybe about 40. But I have yet to investigate, but not less than 30 anyway. So if out of 70, 30 got killed by this confusion and surprise, and the remaining 40 got killed engaged in battle against heavy odds, that cannot be termed as defeat at all by any standards. In fact, Montgomery himself has to admit later on that the Muslims had definite superiority in the fighting skill and the fighting zeal and the fighting will over the invading army. He says, on the other hand, the Meccan retreat rather presupposes that the Muslims had been definitely superior when fighting on foot under equal conditions. The only wrong which Montgomery Watt has committed is the addition of unnecessary comment under equal conditions. You see, he's so niggardly about giving compliments to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions, that when he is compelled to admit that on foot, first of all, he says, he rules out the Muslims fighting on foot against a mounted army. He says, that's not what I have in mind. That is what he seems to say. He says, what I have in mind is, if the Muslims are fighting on foot an enemy, then their skill and their prowess seems to be superior to the enemy, provided under equal conditions. Now this is absolutely wrong. The fact is, there were no equal conditions at all during the Battle of Badr. 700 ill-provided soldiers of various age groups were pitched against an army of well-trained 3,000 renowned warriors of Arabia, 200 of whom were mounted under the command of a person who later on rose as one of the greatest generals in Arab history, that is Khalid bin Walid. And with 3,000 camels to carry them on in the mad rush. This is what he calls equal conditions. It's sheer madness. I think they lose the common sense and bearing and balance when they discuss the battles fought under the leadership of Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam against an overwhelmingly stronger enemy. What hurts them is, why this result? It should not have been this. Why do not we expect total devastation? Why, despite everything, still Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and majority of his companions are saved? And why did Abu Sufyan have to return without having achieved his objective? If they had admitted these things in so many words, then they would also have admitted that God must have been on the side of Prophet Muhammad, because logically otherwise this cannot happen. So this is the problem which bothers them so much, and they have to find some way to wriggle out of this position and to make it appear as if Muslim armies were devastated and completely defeated. Then again, look at his logic and the, the, the difficult situation he finds himself in, and how he, by by use of clever words, he wants to create a different impression from what actually he must have felt had happened. He says, such mayors made it clear that Muhammad was not a man to be trifled with. Now, what comes is going to be a surprise for you. For those who accepted him as leader, there were material advantages. What sort of material advantages? They had been turned out of their homes. They had been forced to abandon everything, their township, their life behind, all their possessions. These were the major material advantages which the Muhajirin had on the side of Muhammad. And what were the major material advantages of the Ansar? They had to share their properties and their livelihood with the incoming flood of Muhajirin, to a degree that many of them opted for completely halving whatever they had and giving half of it to the Muhajirin from Mecca, the immigrants from Mecca. Some of them went so far as to approach Muhammad and say, and by requesting to permit him to divorce 2 of his 4 wives, so that he could offer them as his share of sacrifice for the incoming immigrants from Mecca. So, were these the advantages, material advantages he was referring to? When he goes to a war with a superior enemy, could these be the advantages, that of spoils of war, which the Muslims could have in mind? With a fighting force much inferior in quality, in arms, in equipment, etc., as well as in military training, as well as in age group, as well as in number. In every department of the military comparison, they were inferior to the people, to the armies with which they fought under Hazrat's command. How could they have any material advantages in mind at all? Those who had decided to give up their lives, those who had determined, even before leaving, that they would never return alive from the battlefield. What cruelty, what madness, what beastliness to attribute to them any material gains in mind for going into battlefields. So apparently a small word is used, but this is the biggest folly that you could expect from these Orientalists. By using these small words here, in passing, they in fact unload their entire venom and spit it at the believing Muslims, that this is what we think of you and this is what we think of the victories of Prophet Muhammad and all that. So they reveal themselves. That is why the verse Mutu beghaizikum is a fit rejoinder for them. If this is your state of mind, this is your wisdom, this is your sense of logic and understanding and balance of mind, then what can we say except that die of your own rage? As far as we are concerned, will not harm you in response to these evil utterings, or whatever you may call it. Anyway, he goes on. For those who accepted him as leader, there were material advantages. For those who opposed him, there were serious disadvantages. In what sense? He goes on building the case. Thus, apart from Muhammad's preaching, men had many reasons for taking his side. They were afraid. Afraid of whom? What? A small band of people, a small number of people who are forced to leave their home unprotected, in defense, totally defenseless, seeking shelter in a town 200 and some 50 miles north of their own town. The Medinites were afraid of them. When a single tribe of Jews thought they were stronger than the entire might of the Muslims, including all the later converts to Islam, all just mad raving, nothing more. But he would go on raving like this. Apart from Muhammad's preaching, men had many reasons for taking his side. Now comes the last bit. Consequently, although the Meccans had 3,000 men in the field at the Battle of Uhud. Now this is the 3,000 which continues to plague him and bother him. Why could these 3,000 not totally annihilate the Muslims? So well equipped. So he returns to the same number again and again, and tries to find desperately some reason, some earthly reason, to prove that logically this could be explained why these 3,000 failed to achieve the objective. He says, consequently, although the Meccans had 3,000 men in the field at the Battle of Uhud, the outcome of the battle is never said to be due to the fact that Muslims were outnumbered. Do you understand this? Or no, perhaps? He says, consequently, although the Meccans had 3,000 men in the field at the Battle of Uhud, the outcome of the battle is never said to be due to the fact that the Muslims were outnumbered. The outcome he has in mind is defeat of the Muslims. While in fact, in the first part of the battle, when the battle was fought according to the plan of Hazrat, the invading army of 3,000 was definitely defeated and routed and were made to retreat. This they admit, all of them. If that accident which we have mentioned before had not taken place, this was and this would have remained the outcome of the battle. But he says, due to the fact that the Muslims were outnumbered, what he means to say is their quality was poor. This is the vicious thing which he tries to cover under decent words, which even some rabid anti-Muslims have not attempted to suggest. They all at least pay tribute to the quality of the Prophet Muhammad's faithful companions. And they say that they got defeated, that's all right. But what he's suggesting is a completely different thing. He says the quality of the Muslims soldiers was poor because all of them did not have faith in Prophet Muhammad, because they did not want to fight the battle believing them to be on the side of justice. Only they were afraid. Now this is the vilest lie that I have ever heard from any anti-Muslim Orientalist, hostile Orientalist, and he is considered to be one of the most decent ones, the most civilized. An Orientalist who takes pride in the fact that great Muslim princes from Middle East are sent to become his pupils to learn Islam and the history of Islam from him. So this is the hocus pocus nonsense which he must be teaching to them, and what would be the outcome and product of his the people who unfortunately were his pupils. But anyway, let's continue. There's yet more to come. Consequently, although the Meccans had 3,000 men in the field at the Battle of Uhud, the outcome of the battle is never said to be. Now, this the word never said to be. As if the entire committee of historians are without exception on his side. Never once, even a single historian in the history of comments on Islam or bad comments on both Battle of Uhud had any doubt about the fact that it was not because they were outnumbered that they got defeated. It was because basically they were disbelievers or people who were forced to fight unwillingly against their own wishes. So the word never also is rankling, is very, very painful. But he goes on building it further. And though this point could partly be explained away, it does perhaps give us some justification. He always now falls back to the number again. You know what is hurting him so much? I have fully, clearly, very closely examined him, his inside, dilemmas, and I can see him through and through. What he's saying is that all right would put as a factor for defeat the faithlessness and the lack of will to fight on the part of the Muslims who accompanied Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to the Battle of Uhud and put the 3,000 on one side. Still there is something lacking. The outcome was not still what we should have expected. So there has to be something more. And that something more, according to him, is it does perhaps give us some justification for thinking that Muhammad may have had about 2,000 men that day. Look, this is how he builds this scenario of 2,000 men against 3,000. This is his justification. In fact, it is a confession of immense stupidity on his part to believe that 700 men, including many among them those who went to fight against their will, could not be trounced, could not be totally annihilated. Why? So in fact this argument goes against him. If the army of 700 companions of Muhammad was even further plagued by hypocrisy and lack of faith in Prophet Muhammad and was motivated also partly by selfish ulterior motives of gaining material, of having material gains, then this become a very weak force as against 3,000. It must have been completely trounced and destroyed. But this was not the result. So he says, they have to be more in number. 2,000. How he reaches the number 2,000, doesn't go beyond and doesn't recedes backwards, I don't know, I don't understand. But I know he's in difficulty, he's in pain. So my answer to him is, Mutu bi-ghazikum. That's the best answer that God has taught us. Then he turns to a verse of the Holy Qur'an which was revealed in relation to Ghazwa Badr, where God promised that if Muslims, believing Muslims, were 1 to 10 against an army of outnumbering the Muslims of 10 to 1, they could still win with the help of Allah. But for the time being, there is weakness, lack of training, weakness of many sorts, in fact, in weaponry, in food supplies and other conditions. So you are, the Holy Quran seems to tell the Muslims that at present you are very weak for by you have been weakened by many problems which are temporary. A time would come when you will resolve all these problems, you will come out as a healthy, normal society. Then your strength against the enemy would be measured in the terms that one of the Muslims will be able to defeat 10 of the enemies confronting him. So these are the verses to which he refers. He says, "O thou prophet, stir up the believers to fight. If there be 20 of you who endure, they will overcome 200, and if there be 100 of you, they will overcome 1,000 of those who have disbelieved." He says Muhammad doubtless realized that there was an element of exaggeration in this. Doubtless realized. Why must he have realized? This is the question. What was the outcome of the Battle of Badr? There were 313 Muslims, ill-equipped as you know, including some old men and some children, who had completely routed an army of 1,000 strong warriors from Mecca. So what reason did he have to doubt that this was an exaggeration? He had every reason to believe that when God said, only at this time you will be able to overpower an enemy twice as strong as you are, that was an understatement. That was the only logical conclusion he could have drawn. Because there, at the Battle of Badr, it was not a ratio of 1 to 2 which they had defeated. It was a ratio of 1 to 3 or more which they had defeated. So the promise was fulfilled, and there was every reason to believe that there was no exaggeration at all about this. And the same applies to the future battles. When the Muslims had overpowered their problems of the beginning, and they were able to train themselves into well-organized armies, well-fed armies, the outcome of the battles during that period when they fought against the forces of Persia was even more surprising than the outcome which has been promised to them. Instead of 1 to 10, the Muslims in the time of Hazrat Umar were able to defeat sometimes an enemy 20, 30, 50 times stronger than the Muslims were in number. And there are also recorded episodes when an army of more than 100,000 invading Persians, well-trained warriors of course, were they saw a bizarre phenomenon of only 60 mounted Muslim soldiers attacking the heart of that well-arranged army and killing hundreds of them, if not thousands, and returning safe most of them back to their camp. And they could not do anything about it. This was done under Khalid bin Walid, if I correctly remember. He it was who charged the heart of the invading Iranian army of some say 60,000 or some say even more than that. And everybody was surprised that only a band of 60 or thereabout Muslim mounted soldiers are attacking the heart of this overwhelmingly strong army and overwhelmingly larger in number. And the outcome of the whole day of fighting was that they left behind desolation and destruction and even retreat in some sections, and most of them returned safely back to their camp. So the promise of God was kept far more than the words would give us reason to believe. And this is exactly how Allah promises. the basic principle which is to be understood in the promises of God is that when He promises to punish, more often than not, that promise will not be fulfilled in its entirety. Less than you expect would come by way of punishment from Allah. And He sometimes may forgive entirely and completely, and this is why sometimes people don't understand why a promise of punishment was not kept at all. For instance, many of the enemies of Ahmadiyyat has attacked Hazrat Mirza Tahir Ahmad on this front particularly. They say, you said God would punish that enemy of yours like this and that, and it appears that He did not punish exactly as He promised you. While this is a long debate, we have treated all these areas of discussion, areas of dispute in different books. Recently, a book written by Naeem Usman has very effectively dealt with this question. So anybody who is interested in finding out more about such prophecies of Masih Maud, which are, as they are alleged by the enemies not to have been fulfilled, this book offers a very interesting study. And also I have participated somewhat, a little bit, in this, in guiding him as to what approach he should take and how he should handle this subject. But let's turn back to this question of promises. In principle, as Hazrat Masih Maud has made it clear many a time, when the God promises to punish, if there is even a tendency towards repentance, if somebody, the enemy who has been threatened by dire consequences of his misbehavior, begins to thaw down in his animosity and begin to show signs of fear of Allah, then it is more likely for Allah not to fulfill that promise than to fulfill it. Hazrat Masih Maud also quotes the case of Jonah, the prophet of the fish, of the whale. He says God had promised and there was no room left at all for repentance on the part of the people of Jonah to make Allah change that promise of punishment. There was no mention of such thing. It was a very definite, clear-cut promise on such and such date, on such and such day in the morning, a total calamity would overtake and destroy the people. Yet, when Jonah migrated from there, and migrated, but left the place expecting the punishment from God to come, and at the appointed time, he went some distance from the town and kept waiting somewhere about the news of what may have happened behind him. And when the time passed and people started coming from that direction, travelers, people on journey, and he inquired from them what happened to their dwelling, that township, everybody said everything is fine, everything is going on all right. He was so disgusted. Being a prophet of God, he was stupefied. He couldn't understand this. And he left his own township in protest against God's forgiveness. Little did he know that within a short period from that, it would be forgiveness of God which would save him as well from the sin of defiance. And he would be saved from the belly of the fish in under impossible situations where normally people are not saved. So that was a fitting answer to Jonah of how the mercy of Allah is all encompassing and all powerful. Otherwise, if you don't relate this like I have, then you don't understand why it happened to Jonah. But in relation to his reaction to God's mercy, this was the best answer to him. Look here, I'm also merciful to you. And your sin is even greater in the sense that you are my prophet. Such misbehavior was not expected of you. And God also mentions it in the Holy Quran that if God had not forgiven him for and accepted his repentance, he might have ended up till the day of the resurrection in the belly of the fish. From there he would have been raised as prophet of God. So this is about the promises of God. About his promises of rewards, what he promised, he always fulfills much more than you expect, much more than words would make you expect. So when he says 1 to 10, it doesn't mean only 1 to 10. He says, this is the minimum I guarantee. You will see more of my kindness and my mercy. So he says, was an element of exaggeration in this, as is shown by his hesitation about going out to meet the Meccans. Imagine. How stupid. He says that Prophet Muhammad hesitated to go out to meet the Meccans at the Battle of Uhud because he must have remembered the promise of God at the time of Badr, and he must have felt that Allah had a bit exaggerated the things. The man seems to have gone totally out of his mind, completely lost balance. But let's now turn to the vicious attack of the notorious Very. He says, now he exults and gluts over the situation created in the outcome of the Battle of Uhud. Still, he has those small, small, let me say, periods of feeling very uneasy about what happened in the end. But you will see that when I read. He says, to excuse the ill success of this battle and to raise the drooping courage of his followers is Muhammad's drift in the remaining part of this chapter. Muir gives a wonderfully vivid description of the crisis through which Muhammad was called to pass after the defeat of Uhud. The scoffs and taunts of the infidels and Jews well nigh overthrew the faith of the Muslims. This is how they saw. Well nigh overthrew the faith of Muslims. How can Muhammad pretend now, they asked, to be anything more than an aspirant to the kingly office? No true claimant of the prophetic dignity hath ever been beaten in the field or suffered loss in his own person and that of his followers as he hath. Under these circumstances, it required all the address of Muhammad to avert the dangerous imputation, to sustain the credit of his cause and reanimate his followers. This he did mainly by means of that portion of the Qur'an which appears in the latter half of the third surah, Life of Muhammad by William Muir. Having quoted him, having satiated his desire to hurt the Muslims, now he concludes, students of the Quran will not fail to notice here that every device of the Prophet to encourage his crestfallen people is clothed in the garb of inspiration. Every exhortation to steadfastness in the cause of Islam, every rebuke for unfaithfulness, every plaudit bestowed upon the brave is presented as coming from the mouth of God. How stupid. He claims to be an Orientalist who has read the Quran, all the Muslim fundamental literature and everything, and he still doesn't seem to know that the entire Quran is claimed by Prophet Muhammad to be the word of God. So what does he mean by saying that in these verses he pays the tribute and does other things, employ these plaudits, etc., as he calls it, in the name of God, to assure people that this is from God. While they believed in him as prophet of God, they believed in the Quran being from the mouth of God, every word of it they believed to be a revelation from God. But I don't see why and how he can make fun of this. It's ununderstandable, unless, of course, he's feeling very uneasy about what had happened, and he wants to injure the Muslim cause where the enemy at the Battle of Uhud failed to injure. Now, about the description of the crestfallen Muslim companions, those who had almost lost faith in Islam, those who needed so much boosting and blood transfusion to keep up their drooping faith in Prophet Muhammad, etc. Let's turn now to the Battle of Uhud and see what was happening there. How actually the Muslims were reacting to the whole situation. Had they really started doubting the prophecy of Muhammad and its truth and sincerity? When you read the account of what had passed on the battlefield after the so-called defeat, as they claim, then only you will realize the Muslim response to this situation, and then only you will realize the hollowness of this and meaninglessness of this attack. One of the companions of the Holy Prophet who got martyred in this battle was Amr bin al-Jamu. He was a lame person of slightly advanced age, rather advanced age, because his own sons also were young and strong enough and old enough to participate in the Battle of Uhud. They prevented him. They tried to pursue him against his participating in the Battle of Uhud. They said, you have only one leg. You can only hop one and a half a leg, let's say. How can you fight? And you are our father, grown up old man. So he said, no, I must. So his sons complained to Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and made him order him not to participate in the Battle of Uhud. This was the spirit of the Muslims who, according to Montgomery, were fighting for personal gains and this and that and ulterior motives. Then Amr bin Jamu appealed to Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to revise his decision. He said, O Prophet of Allah, my sons are asking me, are pressurizing me not to participate because I am lame. But Allah is my witness that despite this disadvantage, the lameness, I also have a very strong desire to be martyred and go to Jannah, and to limp along in Jannah after this martyrdom. So let this not be a hindrance to me for attaining martyrdom. So Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam overruled the objection of his sons and permitted him to go to the battle. The prayer he begged of Allah at the commencement of the battle was, Allahumma rzuqni shahada. Oh my Allah, please feed me martyrdom. Then after he was martyred, of course, as it was expected, Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw in a vision that he was limping along the gardens of Jannah. Of course, it was a vision, but it indicated that his desire got fulfilled by Allah. Now, this story is not finished. There is more to come. Hazrat Aisha Siddiqa radhiyallahu ta'ala anha reports that as she was proceeding towards the battle of Badr, having heard of the debacle, different confusing reports were reaching, so people were just running to the battlefield to see what had happened. She reports that on the way she met the wife of Amr bin Jammu, whose name was Hind, who had a camel load of something which turned out to be the bodies of her relatives who were martyred. So she inquired from her about the news of the battle. She said, Alhamdulillah, all praise be to Allah, that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is safe. Then she turned at the load on the back of the cattle of the camel and said, "What is this?" She said, "The corpse of my husband, Amr bin Jammu, and the corpse of my brother, Abdullah bin Amr, and also the corpse of my son, Khalad. These are the three corpses I am carrying back." And yet she was so happy and contented that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was safe and sound. After this, she decided to part company of Hazrat Aisha, but the camel refused to move a step in the direction of Medina. And by that time, perhaps it had already set, and it would refuse to rise again. And whatever she did, the camel would not move a step in the direction of Medina. Then suddenly she thought of something, and she turned the face of the camel towards the battlefield of Uhud. And then it started moving all right. Then she realized and understood the meaning. While this was happening there, Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was instructing his companions to go in search of the corpses of Amr and Abdullah bin Amr and his son, so that they could be buried together. And that was a time when this happened there, and the wife of Amr bin Jammu was forced to carry the corpses back towards Rasulullah, as if in response to his desire to see the corpses. Now she unloaded the camel on the feet of Rasulullah, throwing before him all the corpses. Rasulullah, when he heard the episode of what happened and how she was compelled to come back, he said he must have desired that after the martyrdom, he must reach my feet. And it is in response to that desire that Allah has managed to have all this brought about. And that is the time when he said one of his most famous, he uttered one of the most famous observations, Rubba ashasa aghbara law aqsama ala Allahi la barra, that I swear by Allah that many a time a man with disheveled hair and shabbily and poorly dressed person, dust all over his face and body and clothes, sometimes swears by Allah that this is what will happen. He doesn't pray, he just swears. And because Allah loves him so much as to fulfill what he says, attributing to him, he has it done exactly as he says, as he declares. That is to say that some people who apparently are poorly clad and uh, very shabbily dressed, etc., who don't even have time to wash themselves, or maybe they are involved in such labor as the whole body is in sweat and dust, etc. But to God they are so dear that if sometimes having faith in Allah, they say this is what is going to happen, it does happen exactly as that. So the Holy Prophet said he is one of those. Amr bin Jammu must be one of such people. He must have desired, my corpse must find the feet of Prophet Muhammad after my martyrdom, and so Allah uh, saw to it that it happened so. At the battlefield, what was happening was that while the enemy was attacking from all sides, and there was a barrage of uh, mm, arrows and other attacks by spears and swords from all sides, the Muslims were completely surrounded around Ahmad. Then he received now he got injured by the stone in the mouth. That stone was hurled at him by Saad bin Abi Waqas, the idolater brother of Saad bin Abi Waqas, Utbah bin Abi Waqas. Saad bin Abi Waqas was a very devout, uh, not Muslim only, he was a devout person who was madly in love with Ahmad. So he said, after I learned that it was my brother who had injured Ahmad, I desired none other to be killed at my hands than my brother who was so unfortunate as to injure Ahmad. So he said, I scanned the horizon, I went madly in search of this man, so that in answer to what he had done to Muhammad, I could kill him with my own hands. This was the faith of the companions of Muhammad, which is being attacked by Very and Montgomery as having been shapen, destroyed, and wanted to be boosted up. Abu Dujana is one of the companions who, according to Saad, covered Ahmad like a shield and took all the arrows or other stones, etc., directed against Ahmad on himself until he fell dead and martyred. Hazrat Talha was one of those fortunate companions of Muhammad who had no other thing in his hand, no shield in his hand to cover Muhammad from the barrage. So he used his hands, bare hand, and took all the arrows on his bare hand, with the result that afterwards, all his life, that arm remained limping along the side without any strength, without any power. It had got completely paralyzed. But he got strength enough at that period to keep it aloft and covering Rasulullah's face with his hand throughout. So he used to take pride in this, of course, rightly so. Whenever somebody said the man with one arm, the limping one on his side, he was so deeply rewarded with that taunt, in fact, and took pride in the fact that, yes, I have only one arm left. One Ansari, that by the name of Anas bin Nadr, he passed by a party of the companions after this incident of the spread of rumor that Anand had got martyred, who was sitting, dazed in some place. He said, "Why? What has happened to you? Why are you sitting like this?" So they answered, "Rasulullah has received the martyrdom." He said, "Then this is no time to sit. Let's go and get killed in the battlefield. Afterwards, life is meaningless." And this is what he did. And according to reports, when his body was discovered ultimately, it had 80 wounds on it of all sorts. So he fought desperately till the last ounce of strength ebbed out of his body. One of the Ansar ladies, when she heard the news, she rushed madly towards the battlefield, inquiring about Ahmad. She was a lady who had lost her father, her husband, her brother. All three had got martyred. When she inquired about Ahmad from various people she met on the way, everybody who knew what had happened to her husband, her father, and her brother started responding by telling her gently, by breaking the news very ever kindly, that we regret, we sympathize that you have lost your father, your brother, your husband. And every time she heard this, she said, "I'm not inquiring about them. Tell me about the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is he alive?" Now, while it happened, suddenly she saw Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam emerging from a cluster of his companions, and she could see him alive and walking slowly towards to Medina. And suddenly she burst out with the exclamation, "Kullu musibatin ba'daka jalalu." O Prophet of Allah, if you are alive, that all the other calamities mean nothing to me. They just pale away before the brightness of my beloved Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And every loss appeared to be meaningless. Every loss, in fact, turned to gain for her when she found that Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was alive. Were they the people who needed any booster for their courage, for their love, for their faith? All these incidents which I am reporting happened after the incident of the rumored death of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that was the time for them to show their real color and the quality of their faith. This is the quality of their faith. This was the real color of their devotion to Islam and to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Once, when the attack of the Quraysh against Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very severe, and the column was moving irresistibly towards him, it could overtake him any moment. Suddenly he raised the voice and said, "Who is it who would sacrifice his life for me?" There he did not say for God or for anybody else, for the cause, for the message. He said, is there anyone who could sacrifice his life to save me? One of the Ansaris heard this cry and some others joined him. There were total six of them who responded by saying, yes, O Prophet of Allah, we are here to shed our blood and our lawful our lives for you to save you. And then they responded to this attack so desperately and with such apparent madness that, of course, it stopped the onslaught of the attack, but in that process, all of them gave up their lives. None could survive. So, is this the quality of the faith of the companions of Muhammad, which is so viciously and mercilessly being attacked by Montgomery and Wary? Ziyad was the leader. Ziyad was the first person who had responded by saying this. He is the one whom I mentioned in my sermon last Friday. While he was injured, as he requested himself, his body was carried to the feet of Muhammad. While they put him close to the feet, with all the effort left in him, he raised his head and placed it on the feet themselves. He was touching the feet perhaps, but not his head was not on the feet, and that is what he desired. These are the people who are alleged to be hypocrites, fighting against their will, and having lost their faith in Islam after what happened on the day of the Battle of Uhud. Also, Ibn Hisham reports that it was not only the adults who participated in that battle, there were young boys who contested their merit with each other before Muhammad to be included among the Muslim soldiers. They were both minor of age, and they were rejected by Muhammad outright. And Rasulullah said, no, you're too young, I won't permit you to fight. So one of them ultimately got Muhammad convinced by saying that he was older by a year or two from this young man. So if he is not permissible, I may be permitted, because I am slightly older, and you should take into account this, this advantage over this young fellow of mine, my brother. The other younger brother kept silent until Muhammad had decided to include him. When he had done it, suddenly he came forward and said, Ya Rasulullah, you have decided in favor of my brother who has advantage of age over me, but now I request you to make us wrestle with each other. And if before your very eyes I defeat him, then I have a right to be included because I'm a stronger man than my older brother. So Rasulullah smiled at that and permitted him as well. I don't remember whether both were martyred or not, but this was the quality of the faith of the companions of Muhammad, and this was the quality of the soldiers who fought with him. The incident which I quoted was different. I'm sorry. We are quoted in my khutbah last time. I have got it before me, how exactly what it happened. The name of that person was Hazrat Saad bin Rabi. Ansalam knew about Saad bin Rabi, that he loved him so madly that for his sake he would most certainly lay his life in the battlefield, and yet he would also desire that Rasulullah Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam knows what had happened. So he sent for him and said, find out for me where Saad bin Rabi is. So the companions scattered all around the battlefield, calling his name, Saad bin Rabi, without any answer. And they returned to Sallallahu and reported this, that, O Prophet of Allah, we have searched everywhere, we've called his name loudly, no response, complete silence. Rasulullah said, he must have received some news from God that he was still alive, otherwise there is a strange response to this report. He said, did you take my name and did you announce my name, that the Prophet of Allah is calling you, O Saad bin Rabi, and still didn't get any response? He said, no, Ya Rasulullah, we didn't do that. We just said, Saad bin Rabi, where you are, and there was complete silence. He said, go back and announce this, that Prophet of Allah wants you, Saad bin Rabi. When they did it, one of them heard a very feeble voice from under a heap of corpses. Something disturbed, moved, and he heard the voice, I'm here. Ibn Ka'b, who reports this, he immediately reached him and told him that the Prophet of Allah has specifically sent me for you, to you, to find out how you are. While he was in the throes of death at that moment, he could only respond by saying that, convey my salam to the Prophet of Allah and say that all the reward that is granted by Allah to the prophets for the sacrifices of their companions and their followers, my last wish is this, that you get the most of that reward of all the prophets of Allah, that you be the happiest person, most satisfied, by realizing that the sacrifices of my companions, for whom I am rewarded by Allah, are the greatest by any measures. And that was the last thing he said, and gave up his life. So I should stand corrected, and you better in the khutbah correct this portion. Add, this was another person, who was carried, like I have already reported. There are two different persons, and because it was long ago I had read this, so I had got confused. So this was the quality of Ahmad's companions, men and women all alike. This was a reaction from Badr. And as far as this exultation about Ahmad's injury and the taunts, etc., directed against him, about no Prophet of Allah has ever been disgraced, no companions of the Prophet of Allah has ever been disgraced like Prophet Muhammad has been disgraced on the battle of Uhud. Remember that both these commentators are Christians. I simply fail to understand, how could they forget their own history? What happened to Jesus Christ and his companions? If you want to read the most tragic treatment of Jesus Christ at the hands of his enemies, what happened at the battle of Uhud would appear to be like a tea party to you in comparison. No comparison whatsoever. It is painful for me to read out in detail because we also love Prophet Hazrat Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. We believe him to be a true prophet of God. We don't glut over pain of servants of Allah. They suffered at the hands of their enemies. So I'll only give you the brief references if somebody wants to refresh his memory as to how Prophet Jesus Christ was treated, how he was, according to the Christian scholars, debased and totally disgraced at the hands of his enemies. They should read Matthew 8:29, Matthew 26:38, 26:50, 26:55, 26:67, 26:68, 26:74, and also, of course, Matthew 27:2, 27:29, 27:26, 27:29, 27:20, 27:30, 27:31, and 27:39. Here is a most disgraceful account and most torturous account of how Prophet Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, was abased and insulted and maltreated and bodily injured, and all sorts of atrocities were committed against him, while he, according to them, was Son of God. If the Son of God could meet such a treatment, why much less insult could not be hurled against a prophet of God, who of course is only second to the Son, could not be his equal. But already we have crossed the time barrier, so inshallah remaining to, we'll start from the next ruku from tomorrow inshallah.